Going to record now. But go ahead, no start, and then why don't we start with the introduction? You introduce your school, and Stephanie will introduce our school. Okay.
Okay. All right. So we're from Findon High School in Adelaide, South Australia. We're quite a small school compared to some. We've got around 300 students. Our school days from about 8:30 till 3. They get a recess break of 20 minutes and a lunch break of about 35, 40. So I know from previous that's much more than you guys get. And it's 7:30 in the morning here.
Introduce yourselves and.
Hi, I'm Stephanie, and this is my partner Pamela. I'm a senior here at WWII High School, and she's a junior.
Tell me what grade that is.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm in 12th grade, and she's in 11th grade. Our school day usually starts at about 8:30 as well, but we get out at about 4. Y'all's lunch is longer than ours. We usually get about 25 to 30 minutes, and we don't have a recess. We have kind of like a study hall in the middle of the day. We call it Cardinal time, and that's about 35 minutes. So, and it is currently 5:05 here.
Tell them how many kids go to our school.
Oh, and I guess and we have 3,200 kids currently attending our school.
Oh, damn time.
That's way too many. Australia is it?
I'm Emily. This is Jack. This is Lisa.
I'm Lisa. I'm the sick one.
And this is Nicole.
We're all in year 11.
We're all in 11th grade.
Yes, 11th grade.
Yeah, so they're all in 11th grade, so they've only got 1 year left before they go to university.
That's nice.
College.
Yeah.
Okay. Are you ready?
Yes, we're ready.
Before we start, can I ask you a question? What's going on with your prime minister?
We don't know.
2 days ago, Tony Abbott, there was a leadership spill, so Malcolm Turnbull in his party challenged him and got more votes. I think it was 56 votes to 44. So Malcolm Turnbull is now our Prime Minister. So we've now had 5 in 5 years. People really couldn't stand Tony Abbott. They couldn't stand his policies. Malcolm Turnbull has a little bit better reputation, has been Prime Minister in the past, but didn't do very well in the public eye. So hopefully he's learnt from his mistakes, although I can't stand Liberals' policies myself, so I would definitely not be voting Liberal in the next election. But yeah, the policies are more for the upper class and more business-like, whereas Liberal is more for the working class, society and unions, etc., like that.
Okay. I just wanted to know. I wasn't that informed, so we appreciate that.
Not a problem, Mike.
Go ahead and start your case, and then maybe after we're done with the speeches, we can kind of talk just a little bit about it, okay?
Sure.
Whenever you're...
President Truman is guilty of...
Okay.
President Truman is guilty of war crimes under Article 6 of the Nuremberg Charter, outlawing the wanton destruction of cities, towns, and villages, or devastation not justified by military necessity. On August 6, 1945, the US President Harry S. Truman gave the orders for an American B-29 bomber to drop the world's first atomic bomb to be used in war on an unaware Hiroshima. The new and revolutionary nuclear weapons carry more power than 20,000 tons of TNT. This explosive power caused the instant death of 70,000 civilians and a further 70,000 over the next 5 years from radiation poisoning. This resulted in well over 140,000 deaths of innocent people, including women and children. This in itself is a major war crime, as the people of Hiroshima had no prior warning of the attacks and no way to know the disaster was coming that President Truman had sent. After all, why else would the people of the Manhattan Project and Target Committee sworn to secrecy? There was no time to evacuate and no time for innocent people to flee for their lives. The annihilation of Hiroshima and Nagasaki through the use of experimental bombs on 2 unsuspecting cities is inherently immoral and is deemed as a war crime. The biggest concept of war crime that Truman committed through the bombing was the target of which the bomb was aimed at. The target was not a military base or headquarters, but the Aoi Bridge, which is situated miles away from any military base. The cities of Nagasaki and Hiroshima were chosen as targets as they had been relatively untouched during the war. Given the bomb was set to be dropped on the bridge and yet missed the target by 800 meters, it was clearly not meant to stop the military from continuing in the war. It did hit the military base, but was not specifically targeted. Little Boy also exploded 1,900 feet above the city, and perhaps had it actually hit the bridge, the results may have been far worse. It is not a justified excuse to say that the Hiroshima and Nagasaki bombings were in retaliation to the Pearl Harbor attacks. It cannot be said that one war crime resulted in retaliation with another, as Pearl Harbor was not deemed a war crime but conventional warfare. The Standard Warfare Act hardly justified not one but 2 nuclear catastrophes. Unlike many of the previous warfare actions, the Target Committee stated that they wanted the first bomb to be sufficiently spectacular for the importance of the weapon to be internationally recognized when publicity on it was released. Were they trying to actually stop and prevent further deaths, or draw the attention to how powerful they had become, and for other countries not to mess with them, or would they basically face complete population wipeout? Few of the scientists in the Manhattan Project were in opposition of the use and pushed for warning of all cities on the possible destruction. One of the questions we need to ask is that once the bombs were decided to be dropped, why were they not dropped on military bases or government buildings, or even on the Emperor's residence? Why were they so close to so many civilians, especially when the fact that they had completed the Trinity test of Little Boy and knew exactly just how dangerous it was and the devastating effects that could cause? The use of not 1 but 2 atomic bombs and mass murder to shorten the war is a crime. Both in moral and legal terms, this act of war is unjustified and cruel. It was claimed that Truman had not had any formal reply from the Japanese government, and this is why he gave the order to drop the second bomb. It is possible he had no formal reply, as the Japanese government were trying to deal with all the casualties and deaths and complete and utter destruction of a city. Truman had ample opportunities to change his mind and decide not to drop the devastating nuclear bombs. A compromise may have been made with the Japanese government. They only had stipulated one condition to surrendering, and that was that the Japanese emperor remain in position. Was this really an unreasonable request? Nothing could have justified the annihilation of 2 cities with nuclear explosions, and therefore Harry Truman was undoubtedly guilty of war crimes. Thank you.
Go ahead with your second.
It's blurry. According to the International Criminal Court, crimes against humanity are any of the following acts committed as a part of a widespread or systematic attack directed against any civilian population with knowledge of the attack. These include murder, extermination, torture, or other inhumane acts of a similar character intentionally causing great suffering or serious bodily or mental injury. The key argument here is with knowledge of the attack. President Truman most certainly knew that he had given the orders to drop the atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. The atomic attack was a cruel, inhumane, and unreasonable attack on an already defeated adversary. After the first bomb was dropped on Hiroshima on the 6th of August, the Americans displayed merciless impatience by not waiting longer to drop the second device. which was delivered on Nagasaki 3 days later, leaving the Japanese emperor a very little amount of time to make the decision to surrender. The people involved in the Manhattan Project knew the amount of destruction that Little Boy could have, so it would be obvious that Fat Man would bring more destruction than Little Boy. The co-pilot, Captain Robert Lewis of Enola Gay commented, "My God, what have we done?" After the bomb was dropped, he saw firsthand the instant devastation and saw the enormity of how many people would be injured and lose their lives. Truman gave a public announcement in which he said, "We are now prepared to obliterate more rapidly and completely every productive enterprise the Japanese have above ground in any city. If they do not now accept our terms, they may expect a rain of ruin from the air, the like of which has never been seen on this earth." With a smirk on his face and the words that came out of his mouth, there was no way he was oblivious to the fact he would kill a mass of the population, especially considering he gave the order to not only drop 1 but 2 nuclear bombs altogether. 90% of all medical personnel were killed or disabled, and the remaining medical supplies quickly ran out. Many survivors began to notice the effects of exposure to the bomb's radiation. Symptoms included nausea, bleeding, and loss of hair to death. Flash burns, susceptibility to leukemia, cataracts, and malignant tumors were some of the other effects. The hibakusha, who are those victims who are still alive, are becoming quite old, 70 years or more. Some are confined to hospitals due to the debilitating trauma and effects of bombs. Such examples of this are the radiation aftermath. According to the Atomic Bomb Museum, the estimated air dose of gamma rays from the bomb in Hiroshima was 10,300 rads. Rad indicates a unit of absorbed radiation. Nagasaki was 25,100 rads. Severe illness occurs with 1,000 rads, causing destruction of bone marrow, marked drop in white cells, anemia, bleeding, destruction of stomach and intestinal fluids. Most victims died within 30 days. Immediate disorientation and coma occur within 10,000 rads, and death follows within hours. And yet Nagasaki was double this. I have always condemned the use of the atomic bomb against Japan, but I could not do anything at all to prevent that fateful. Einstein wrote this in German to Shinohara. Although Einstein had pushed for the Manhattan Project, as he was paranoid that others were developing nuclear weapons, he had been very vocal that this was not his intended purpose, to kill a population, including innocent civilians. Einstein said that he was sure that President Roosevelt would have forbidden the atomic bombing of Hiroshima had he been alive, and that it was probably carried out to end the Pacific War before Russia could participate. The Hiroshima bombing killed about 140,000 people, almost half the city population of the time. More than 70,000 people died within 3 days of the bombing in Nagasaki. A total of 210,000 were killed instantly and another 100,000 injured. According to eyewitness history, the population of Hiroshima prior to the 2 nuclear weapons was approximately 350,000, and then following this was down to approximately 138,000, evidence of a massive depletion of the population. Fat Man, true to its name, exploded at a force 40% greater than the Hiroshima explosion. The city's mountainous terrain helped mitigate the damage. Lucky for Truman that it did, or he would have even had more innocent civilian lives on his hands. How is this not evidence of using nuclear weapons to kill a population? In November 1954, 5 months before Einstein's death, he summarized his feelings about his role in the creation of the bomb. "I made one great mistake in my life. when I signed the letter to President Roosevelt recommending that atom bombs be made. But there was some justification, the danger that the Germans would make them. Everything related to the effects of the Hiroshima and Nagasaki bombs was defined as a military secret. US officials controlled information about radiation from the atomic bombs dropped over Japan by censoring newspapers, silencing outspoken individuals, limiting circulation of the earliest official medical reports, encouraging deliberately reassuring publicity campaigns, and utter lies and denial. The Japanese were also quickly and heavily censored. The moment Japanese physicians and scientists arrived in Hiroshima to investigate the bombing, they collected evidence and studied the mysterious symptoms that were experienced by the ill and dying. American officials confiscated the Japanese reports, medical case notes, biopsy slides, medical photographs, and films sent them to the US, where much remained classified for many years. Is Harry Truman guilty of crimes against humanity? The verdict is in. We think yes. Thank you.
Are you ready for our side?
Yes.
May it please the court, Your Honor, my partner Stephanie Garcia and I, Pamela de la Cerda, will represent President Harry S. Truman in this courtroom today. We understand the serious nature of these charges, and we have Your Honor mounted a challenge to each and every one of these alleged crimes. First, I would like to begin with a brief introduction and background to my client. President Truman was not even in the White House when many decisions about which took place to make, create, and drop the nuclear bombs in the Japanese city have taken place. To fully understand our client, one must understand two relationships. One was a relationship that Franklin Roosevelt shared with the American people, and the other relationship was the one that Roosevelt shared with Truman. Upon the death of FDR on April 12, 1945, the New York Times headline stated, "President Roosevelt is dead. Truman to continue policies. All cabinet members will retain their posts." A nation that mourned the loss of the only president that had been elected 4 times was looking for someone to continue the policies of FDR. President Truman was not president. He was in no political position to do anything that Roosevelt's team had already had in place. Therefore, the event on April 12th not only drew an unprepared person into the White House, it also cemented the fact that nothing could be done from the course that FDR had set our nation upon. The difficult position prosecution finds itself is that they have to try to weigh intentions on decisions that were made basically by others on a man who was thrust into position in which was told to continue FDR policies. Add to the fact about rumors of Japanese atomic bomb projects and their ability to make an atomic bomb, what other decision could the president make? We remind the court that the major portion of a prosecution's case is intent on the part of President Truman. His intent can only be seen through original documents from the first meeting that established the dates and targets for bombing in Japan. The information considered including previous damage, range of the bombing in Japan. The information. It is interesting to note that President Truman was not present at this meeting. This meeting was held on April 27th of 1945, just a matter of 2 weeks before Truman was. According to President Truman's own personal notes, he was not informed about the nuclear bomb until May 21st, 1945. By that time, the committee had met twice, and the third meeting was held on May 28th of 1945. Most of the planning had already been done before President Truman had even been told of the project. On May 31st of 1945, there was a meeting of the Interim Committee, and the discussion of the atomic bomb was the topic of a day-long meeting. In the attendance was the Secretary of War, the director of the Manhattan Project, his leading scientists, and leading generals. The meeting was called by the Secretary of War, Henry Stimson, with the approval of the President to discuss and make the decisions about the atomic bomb.
It's both used to note war and peace and how to handle it in the public. You will note that the experts at this time said the atomic bomb wouldn't mean much different than any current bombing, only a very large cloud and better visuals. It was pointed out that an atomic bomb on an arsenal could not be much different from the effect caused by an Army Air Force strike at present dimensions. However, Dr. Oppenheimer stated that the visual effects of an atomic bombing would be tremendous. It would be accompanied by a brilliant luminescence which would rise from a height of 10,000 to 20,000 feet. The neutron effect of the explosion would be dangerous to life for a radius of at least 2/3 of a mile. Much after discussion, types of targets and effects to be produced, the Secretary expressed a conclusion on which there was a general agreement that we could not give the Japanese any warning, and that we would not concentrate on a civilian area, but we would seek to make a profound psychological impression on as many of the inhabitants as possible. At the suggestions of Dr. Cunnin, the Secretary agreed that the most desirable target would be a vital war plant employing a large number of workers and closely surrounded by a workers' house. There was some discussion on the desirability of attempting several strikes at the same time. Dr. Oppenheimer's judgment was that several strikes could be feasible. General Groves, however, expressed doubt about this proposal and pointed out the following objections. 1. We would lose the advantage of gaining additional knowledge concerning the weapon at such success in bombing. 2. Such a program would require a rush job on part of those assembling the bombs and might therefore be ineffective. 3. The effect would not be sufficiently distinctive from our regular Air Force bombing program. Therefore, it is our assertion that the experts who had been working on the bomb for several years did not know exactly what the impact would be, and therefore it will take out any sort of personal intentions on the part of the President of the United States, who ended up acting on their advice. President Truman is being accused of war crimes, but to be guilty of a war crime, President Truman and his associates would indeed have to conspire to commit the most splendid slaughters in the annals of war. The purpose, in other words, would have to be a desire to use the A-bomb in order to produce precisely such an end, fiendish slaughter, and not to force the Japanese military to make peace or even save more American and Japanese lives than died in the result of the bombing. The purpose of war is by definition to destroy your enemy. If you're attacked and then strike back, how can you be called a criminal? On the issue of the bomb being dropped on a civilian target, it was an accepted presumption from the start was the bomb would be used when ready. The decision made by FDR and carried out by Truman, indeed, to deliver the needed psychological shock, as the minutes of the Intimate Committee on May 28th of 1945. There was a general agreement that we would not give the Japanese any warning, that we would not concentrate on a civilian area, and that we would seek a profound psychological impression on as many Japanese as possible. Thus, the desired target of a war plant closely surrounded by the workers' houses. A very good argument could be made that Truman, like FDR and their advisors, did not truly grasp the real horrors of these weapons. Vannevar Bush and James actually believed that unless the huge and hideous effects of the weapons were graphically demonstrated on cities, people and leaders would not accede to surrender of national sovereignty necessary to enforce an international control system for nuclear weapons. After Hiroshima's bomb was dropped, it was still the case, even if the emperor now wanted to terminate the war quickly, he still balked at accepting the post-Stamp declaration and doubted whether the Imperial Japanese Army would comply with the command to end the war. The result was not to occur until the second bomb was dropped on Nagasaki. Indeed, in arguing that Truman is a war criminal, the prosecution falls into a trap, arguing that any war harm non-combatants is criminal. I'm sorry to say it, but that is the nature of warfare. The goal of fighting a war is to win. To win a war, you prosecute it to take your enemy's ability to wage war. A successful war campaign like General Sherman's March to the Sea would, according to the prosecution, now become a series of war crimes for the burning of Georgia in the Civil War. Bombing did indeed hurt the enemy morale, and the American actions, horrible as they were taken in the context of the Bataan Death March, the rape of Nanking, the bombing by Japan at Shanghai, the forced prosecution of Korean women, and torture of prisoners of war. For these violations at the Geneva Convention in human rights, the Japanese, of course, have not only not apologized, but have hidden the reality of their nation's actions from its contemporary citizens. It is not surprising that in one of these articles that the Japanese audience all vote to condemn the U.S. and Truman for war crimes, while at the same time managing to see their own nation as a pure victim. How can Japan be a victim if they were the ones who started the war in the first place with the attacks on Pearl Harbor on December 7th of 1941? Guam, Wake Island, Philippines, Hong Kong, and Thailand. Putting an end to war that started with the Japanese was a goal for the atomic weapons and the result of the use of the weapons. There are two related questions to consider in order to actually answer the question. The first is the actual amount of casualties Truman and the Joint Chiefs of Staff would occur if the A-bomb was not used. The second is whether the Japanese government would have agreed to end war if the A-bomb had not been dropped. The very least scholarship has all but demolished the revisionist accounts. Writing in the Pacific Historical Review in November of 1998, Sadao Asada offered his own thoroughly researched answers in his seminal article, The Shock of the Atomic Bomb and Japan's Decision to Surrender a Reconsideration. His article reveals that the bomb, and only the bomb, galvanized Japan's peace party to take actions necessary to terminate the Pacific War. What he accomplishes in a virtual tour de force is to correlate the day-by-day decision of the Japanese government from August 6th to August 14th in the context of how to use the A-bomb or to produce an acceptance of the Potsdam's terms and surrender. His criticism that the Japanese historians, the sense of victimization precedent over the historical analysis may be extended as well to Mr. Noble, for whom the desire to brand those who saw the need to use the bomb as a group of war criminals equally takes precedence over the task of a historian. What Asado shows in the Prime Minister Suzuki, before being informed of the Soviet entry into the Pacific War, had decided that because of the A-bomb war, Japan and the USA no longer could be carried on. Anno Foreign Minister Togo added that since the atomic bomb had made its appearance, continuation of the war had become utterly impossible. With the news of the second atomic bomb dropped at Nagasaki, Suzuki feared that rather than stage an invasion for which Japan was prepared, the U.S. would keep on dropping atomic bombs. In other words, both bombs had the effect of jolting the peace party to move towards surrender. Asado described what he calls the shock effect of the Nagasaki bomb on Japan's military and political leaders. As Asado points out, the dropping of the two atomic bombs was an equivalent of American aid to Japan's beleaguered peace party. He agreed, in other words, with Henry L. Stimson, who understood the profound psychological shock worked, for it encouraged the peace party to redouble its efforts to bring about a decision for surrender. Stimson, therefore, was correct when he wrote Truman that the Japanese peace party yielded the military at a point of the pistol. Both the Japanese group and the U.S. advisors accepted the atomic bomb and its use as the main instrument for ending the war. A linkage that Asado notes rested on the atomic devastation of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Since it averted an impending and probable military revolt by the Japanese generals, a hence guaranteed acceptance of the Potsdam terms. The Japanese leaders, although had already begun to hope for peace, did not face the reality of defeat until the Hiroshima bomb, which was needed to accelerate and indeed prevent the peace process from collapse, allowing the emperor to override the military diehards with the acceptance of surrender. Asado also notes that Japan was busy trying to perfect its own atomic bombs, and had it succeeded, there is no doubt that the Japanese military would have succeeded. But their scientists were far behind. They, unlike the Soviets, did not have the advantage of espionage networks firmly planted with the Manhattan Project, and they were totally caught off guard. Believing that no power would be able to finish constructing an A-bomb during the course of war, what is important, however, is not that the Japanese military or political leaders questioned the legitimacy of using an atomic bomb as a weapon that could win the war for their side. It is interesting to note at this point that the atomic bomb was dropped on August 6th and 9th of 1945, but peace was not asked for until August 14th of 1945. On October 2nd of 1945, David Snell broke broke a story about Japanese atomic bombs that exploded on August 12th. Allegedly, on the evening of August 11th, a number of ancient ships, junks, and fishing boats were anchored near a small inlet by the Japanese. Just before dawn of August 12th, a remote-controlled launch carrying the atomic bomb known as Genzai Bakudan, greatest fighter, slowly made its way through the assembled fleet and beached itself. Nearly 20 miles away, observers wearing welder's glasses were blinded by the bomb's terrific blast. The ball of fire was estimated 1,000 yards in diameter. A multicolored cloud of vapor boiled towards the heavens, then mushroomed into the stratosphere. The truck of water and vapor observed the vessels directly under the burst. Ships without the fringe burned fiercely at anchor. And when the atmosphere cleared slightly, the observers could detect several vessels had vanished. How could the Japanese say this was a war crime when they were rushing to do the exact same thing to the US? The problem was that Russia was about to overrun this facility very quickly, and Japan had no way to deliver this weapon. It may be significant that facing these problems and believing would be better than total annihilation. Colonel Agata a military aide wrote in his diary, "Is there not somehow a way to invent a new weapon that would forestall the enemy? If we had such a weapon, it would then be possible to annihilate the enemy's task force and attack the mainland of the US, thus turning the tables and affording a golden opportunity to reverse the tide of war." The fact is that without the use of the A-bomb, Japan was more likely to have not surrendered. By all of its serious problems, its army had a buildup of 900,000 soldiers all ready to defend against the planned American invasion of Cuba, and would have not been able to totally crush the first wave of invaders. No wonder that grunts in the field. Mr. Writer, Paul Fussell, cheered mightily when the sword came that Japan had surrendered, and the Pacific War was over. Asado notes the dropping of the A-bomb forestalled sacrifices on both sides for surpassing those of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Since that time, Sao Asado wrote in his article, his findings had been confirmed and amplified upon Richard B. Frank, a former air platoon leader who fought in the Vietnam and is a graduate of Georgetown University Law Center. Writing in this magisterial book, Downfall, the End of the Imperial Japanese Empire, Frank offers a new research form previously unused and classified sources, along with closely detailed arguments that Japan was nowhere near the surrendering on August of the 1945, and that despite the horror of its effects, the use of the atomic bomb was superior to any existing alternative and saved both American and Japanese lives. As Frank writes, it is a fantasy, not history, to believe that the end of war was at hand before the use of an atomic bomb. Moreover, Frank argues that despite the horrors resulting from the use of the bomb, it is incorrect to assume that any termination of conflict that was avoided the use of nuclear weapons would have been preferable. The point is, indeed, at the heart of the present issue. If Frank is correct, and I believe his tight analysis successfully makes a case for his argument, the result of battle that extended that war would have made things worse for both the Americans and the Japanese. I also cross-apply the fact that on May 31st of 1945, planning meetings, the experts agreed that the nuclear bomb would be very much like a regular bomb and only different because of the optics, larger mushroom-like clouds. Also, cross-apply Exhibit 2, the notes from General Grooves, as well as the top-secret letter Exhibit 1. Without evidence to the contrary, to commit a war crime, you have to know the intentions on part of the people responsible. All the evidence presented here in this trial and the briefs show that Truman did not know exactly what was going to happen. Therefore, before the bomb dropped, he was going with the best advice he had. This is what we're giving is given both President Roosevelt and Truman. It wasn't until the fact of dropping the bombs that people realized that would actually take place. Considering the facts presented at force in 1945, President Truman did not commit war crimes, crimes against humanity, or genocide against the Japanese.
Stephanie, we can't hear you. Stephanie.
Still can't hear
Can you hear me now?
you. Yeah.
Sorry about that. May it please the court. I, Stephanie Garcia, will give you the final two counter arguments in the support of President Harry S. Truman on these charges. Counter argument 3. Conventional methods of war would have resulted in more people dying. On the question of what amount of casualties would have occurred if the atomic bombs had not been dropped, a report commissioned first by W.B. Shockley, who argued that defeating Japan by invasion would have cost 5 to 10 million Japanese deaths and between 1.7 and 4 million American casualties, including perhaps 400,000 to 800,000 fatalities. This report appeared precisely when ultra information showed that Japan's defenses in Kyushu exceeded old estimates by 3 times in combat divisions and 4 times in aircraft, guaranteeing very high casualties. It was in this context that Truman had to decide on the use of the atomic bombs. At Potsdam on July 25, 1945, General Marshall did give the president a bias to believe that the casualties would have substantially exceeded earlier projections. He goes on the contemporary evidence that Secretary Simpson feared that an invasion would have the highest of cost, including immense American casualty totals. The bottom line is that the use of the atomic bomb saved more lives, Japanese included, than would have been the case had the atomic bombs not been used. Nuclear weapons did indeed cost the lives of between 100,000 and 200,000 Japanese non-combats at Hiroshima and Nagasaki, as well as thousands more who died from incendiary raids. However, those Japanese non-combats held no stronger right not to be slaughtered than did the vast number of Chinese and other Asian non-combats. The Japanese non-combats in Soviet captivity in Asia, or the Japanese non-combats, not to mention Allied prisoners and foreign civilian internees, who would have been perished of starvation and in the final agony of the blockade. Only the bomb forced the emperor to accept surrender, and alternatives would not have ended the war or reduced human suffering. Of course, some may argue that a demonstration could have been held and an actual use of the atomic bomb on a target was not needed. But even J. Robert Oppenheimer reported that no display would have been impressive enough to shock the Japanese into surrender, assuming that the 2 available bombs would have worked, and even if it had, it would have left but one to use. In fact, one at the time argued that the atomic bomb should not be used on the city in which non-combats lived. The atomic bomb saved American and Japanese lives, ended the war quickly, forced the Japanese surrender, and precluded an invasion of the home islands, as Robert J. Maddox has written, referring to the planned invasion of the islands in a low estimate of 193,500 casualties. Only an intellectual person could assert that 193,500 casualties were too insignificant to have caused Truman to use the atomic bombs. As a former chief of the Japanese Medical Association has said, when one considers the possibilities that the Japanese military would have sacrificed the entire nation if it were not for the atomic bomb attack, then this bomb might have been described as having saved Japanese. Counter-argument 4. Truman was justified in using the bomb. With only 2 bombs ready and a third on the way by late August 1945, it was too risky to waste one in demonstration over an unpopulated area. Each bomb had to be used to maximize the results. An invasion of Japan would have caused casualties on both sides that could easily have exceeded the toll at Hiroshima and Nagasaki. The 2 targeted cities would have been firebombed. An immediate use of the bomb convinced the world of its horror and prevented future use when nuclear stockpiles were far too large. The bomb's issue impressed the Soviet Union and halted the war quickly enough that the USSR did not demand joint occupation of Japan. The Japanese had demonstrated near fanatical resistance, fighting till almost the last man on the Pacific Islands, committing mass suicides on Japan, and unleashing kamikaze attacks on Okinawa. Firebombing had killed 100,000 in Tokyo with no discernible political effect. Only the atomic bomb could jolt Japan's leadership to surrender. The work of the interim committee was completed June 1st, 1945, when it submitted its report to the president recommending unanimously that 1. The bomb should be used against Japan as soon as possible, and 2. It should be used against military targets surrounded by other buildings. 3. It should be used without prior warning of the nature of the weapon. One member, Ralph A. Bard, later dissented from this portion of the committee's recommendation. Please note that the committee's decision on June 1st, 1945 was the final recommendation and was based upon the decisions that were expressed by the attendees as well as discussions that were held earlier in May of 1945. Cross-apply the fact that reports were up this time. The only thing to about the bomb was the fact that if it would have a mushroom cloud that would go up 220,000 feet in height. This was supported by Dr. Oppenheimer, who was the inventor of the nuclear bomb. At the end of World War II, few questioned Truman's decision to drop the atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Most Americans accepted the obvious reasoning. The atomic bombs brought the war to a timelier end. They did not have a problem with over 100,000 of the enemy being killed. After all, the Japanese attacked America, and not the other way around. In later years, however, many have begun to question the conventional wisdom of Truman was saving lives, putting forth theories of their own. However, when one examines the issue with great attention to the results of the atomic bombings, compares these results with possible alternatives to using said bombs, the line between truth and fiction begins to clear. Truman's decision to use the atomic bomb on Japan was for the purpose of saving lives and ending the war quickly in order to prevent a disastrous land invasion. Added to this fact is the fact that members of the U.S. Congress were calling for action as well. Punish the Japanese for their surprise attack of Pearl Harbor, telegram from Senator Richard Russell to President Harry Truman. Permit me to respectfully suggest that we cease our efforts to jolt Japan into in accordance with the Potsdam Declaration. Let us carry the war to them until they beg us to accept the unconditional surrender. The foul attack on Pearl Harbor brought us into war, and I am unable to see any valid reason why we should be so much more considerate and lenient in dealing with Japan than with Germany. The contemptuous answer of the Japs to the Potsdam ultimately justifies a revision of that document. In sterner peace terms, our people have not forgotten that the Japanese struck us the first blow in this war without the slightest warning. They believed that we should continue to strike the Japanese till they were brought groveling to their knees. We should cease our appeals to Japan to sue for peace. The next plea for peace would come from an utterly destroyed Tokyo with assurance of self-esteem. Richard B. Russell, U.S. Senator. These were not only the lives that concerned President Truman. Marshall King and Lee military advisors to President Truman discussed predicted casualties during the planning for the invasion of Japan. He said Marshall and King both strongly advocated the invasion of Kyushu, one of Japan's islands, and at the earliest possible dates. Lee had been opposed to invasion of the Jap mainland. Marshall held that such an attempt on would cost in casualties not more than 63,000 of the 190,000 combat troops estimated as necessary for the invasion. Admiral Lee recalled that the president had been interested in knowing what the price and casualties for Kyushu would have been rather or not that the price could be paid. His points out there on the troop on Okinawa had lost 35% in casualties. If this percentage were applied to the number of troops to be employed in Kyushu, he thought from the similarity of the fighting to be expected that this would give a good estimate of the casualties to be expected. Counter argument 5. It was the Japanese who began this war. When King Xerxes took his army to conquer the Greeks, he never counted the Siberian king Leonidas and his 300 Spartans holding his army of almost 1,000,000 men up a couple of days. He brought the war to the Greeks, but Leonidas brought death to the Persians. If our opponents had their way, they would have somehow persecuted the Greeks for defending themselves too well to the Persians. First of all, our opponents' arguments are based on war that was actually begun by the Japanese. Until the acts of the bombing of the U.S. bases and territories on December 7, 1941, the Empire of Japan and the United States were officially in peace. There was not a war and there was no hostile intentions. This era was broken with bombings of Pearl Harbor, Guam, Midway, Wake Islands, and the Philippines on December 7, 1941. This coordinated attack on many different parts of the United States territory was deliberate, premeditated, and done without warning. Therefore, it was the Japanese who created the act of war by this attack, and it is now odd that it is the Japanese who are trying to protest how the war ended. War is fought to win. If you fight a defensive war when your enemy attacks you, you will not be the winner. Therefore, the best counter-argument to our opponent is the fact that the only reason we had a war in the first place was that we were attacked by the Japanese. Now to claim the fact that the war crime exists when you are in fact the reason for the war, not only is this ludicrous, it defies all sorts of logic. Overall, the thrust of this argument was taken out simply by a legal standing. Without the Japanese actions on December 7, 1941, the war wouldn't have existed, and without a war, there would have been no atomic bomb attacks. Thereby, the war crime can only exist in the legal standing if there was a war since the Japanese brought the attack on the U.S. and by doing so created a state of war. Then the Japanese are solely responsible for their actions. These actions resulted in the U.S. going to war and then the U.S. ending the war. The U.S. cannot be prosecuted for a war crime here because it was pursuing the course of a battle to end the war they didn't start. You can't be deceived, Your Honor. To have war crime brought against the injured party by the attacks because they fought too well or too hard would send wrong messages. War crimes laws are to protect the innocent, the Americans, the Jews, etc. You shouldn't allow these laws to be twisted up and protect the aggressors. This will just encourage more wars and more fake war crimes, while at the same time make a mockery of real war crimes. To render a decision that President Harry Truman committed a war crime by dropping the atomic bombs on Japan would be simply and totally revisionist in thought, word, and deed. No one, including experts, knew exactly what happened on the day of the first drop. Decisions were made to end a war that was brought to the United States when on December 7, 1941, the Imperial Naval and Air Forces of Japan attacked Pearl Harbor in the U.S. The United States entered the war the next day. From 1941 until 1945, the United States was conducting a war to defeat the Empire of Japan. In the course of the war, they had used 2 nuclear bombs. These weapons have never been used before or since. The purpose of the strategic battle plan was to knock the Empire of Japan out of the war. The Japanese surrendered after that, and World War II came to an end. In the end, Truman saved millions of people in the U.S., Asia, Australia, and Japan. The prosecution is missing 2 very important facts. America was at war. This was a horrific war in which 50 million people died. The loss of 200,000 people to end was acceptable. As horrific as it sounds, Truman needed to kill them to save lives. The second point is Japan attacked the U.S. first. They bombed Pearl Harbor without warning, killing nearly 3,000 Americans. You cannot simply call an attempt to end a war with the other party started a war crime without making the entire argument mute, asserting that there would have never been a war without the Japanese attacking us first. Without Japan's attack on the U.S. territories and possessions, war would have not existed, and thereby throwing out the entire basis of the prosecution's arguments of being a war crime. Since Japan began the attack with the events of December 7th and 8th, 1941, the Japanese brought this upon themselves. They reaped what they sowed. Not only that, but the Japanese were much more brutal in their treatment of prisoners of war and civilians in conquered nations. In Nanking, Japanese soldiers raped and burned women. They used children as sword fighting. The Japanese attacked a peace-loving nation. Are we to feel sorry for them when they received what they had been giving for nearly a decade? I think not. Harry S. Truman is a peace-loving man who loves humanity. He did not commit crimes against humans, and he made the ultimate sacrifice in killing what he loves for the sake of lives of others. He will forever be tortured by this decision that he made. That is more than he deserves. What would you have done with this if this decision had been yours? If you hesitate for even a second, then it cannot be a crime. The decision is bigger than you or me. The decision had to be made. Your Honor, I have proved without a shadow of a doubt that President Harry S. Truman did not commit crimes against humanity. Now you will see him for the hero that he is. President Truman took over for President Roosevelt at the end of the war. He only found out about the atomic bombs after the death of the president. He was told that it was the key to ending the war. After extensive research and dedicated, heartfelt deliberation, President Truman came to the conclusion that the dropping of the atomic bomb was the best and most humane way to end the war. He was advised by the designers of the nuclear program that it would be like any other bomb. He was advised to give no warning, and he was advised to use a military target. He did all of these things that he was advised to do. At the same time, in the early summer of 1945 in Okinawa, there were over 200,000 deaths. This fight showed President Truman and generals that the Japanese would fiercely fight for their homeland. This was a crystal ball that the president used to see the future if America invaded the main islands of Japan. Millions of lives would have been lost. Both Americans and Japanese would die. The war needed to end. It needed to end with the swiftest as possible. President Truman okayed the dropping of 2 atomic bombs on the 2 military cities in Japan as a way to stop the bloodshed. The prosecution tried to tell you that it was not necessary, but the Japanese were willing to die rather than to surrender. It was proven for over 3 years before Harry S. Truman is a hero, not a criminal. You must vote not guilty and allow presidents in the future to be able to make tough decisions without the fear of being thrown into prison for those decisions. President Truman was strong enough to make this very tough decision. Please find that man not guilty of these accusations laid upon him. Thank you for your time.
Thank you so much for offering this opportunity for us today.
Mike, sorry, we haven't gone through our questions. The 2 kids that were doing our
the 4
questions.
questions is great. Go ahead.
So there were 4 questions that you had for us to answer. So our students will read the question first and then their response.
Were these attacks widespread or systematic? The international Can you hear us?
Yes, we can.
You can't hear me because I muted it. All right, cool. Were these attacks widespread or systematic? The International Criminal Court clearly states that crimes against humanity include acts which are committed as part of widespread or systematic attacks directed against a civilian population with knowledge of the attack. Truman knew that both Little Boy and Fat Man would cause widespread damage to any intended target. On July 16, 1945, the US scientists involved in the Manhattan Project detonated a test atomic bomb known as Gadget in remote New Mexico. This test resulted in a crater nearly half a mile wide and was the equivalent of over 20,000 tons of TNT. Truman, as President of the United States and Commander-in-Chief, would have been made aware of the results of the test carried out in New Mexico. Having knowledge of what Gadget could do, Truman would have been aware that the acts being committed with Little Boy and Fat Man was going to be widespread. Ultimately, the bombing of Hiroshima confirmed that the damage was indeed widespread. as the initial blast destroyed a vast majority of buildings within a radius of 1 mile. Furthermore, the death toll from Hiroshima was up to 70,000. People confirming that the bombs were indeed used to create widespread damage and death, and furthermore reinforcing the fact that there was no need for Fat Man to be used in Nagasaki. It was not only just psychological shock, there were also many casualties and deaths. You stated that the definition of war was to cause destruction to the enemy. The question I have to ask from that is, how were innocent civilians the enemy? They did nothing and accepted loss of their lives and livelihood. Question 2. Did Truman have the ultimate authority? I believe Truman was adequately prepared to make an informed decision about the civilian casualties and deaths, and so he did not have the ultimate authority. Truman knew full well that the articles existed, such as the Geneva and Hague Conventions, which prohibit committing acts of violence against civilians. Therefore, he did not have the ultimate authority to make that decision. Under the 1907 Hague Convention and Protocol 1 of the Geneva Convention, air warfare must comply with the laws and customs of war, including international humanitarian law, by protecting civilians of conflict and refraining from attacks on protected persons. The many innocents who lost their lives are classified as protected persons. To be legal, aerial operations must comply with the principles of humanitarian law, military necessity, distinction of proportionality, and proportionality. An attack or action must be intended to help in military objective, and the harm caused to civilians or civilian property must be proportional and no excessive in relation to concrete and direct military advantage anticipated. Certainly one nuclear bomb on its own was already excessive enough without needing to drop in Fat Man 2. President Truman didn't have the right and authority to commit war crimes such as murdering civilians and mortarily destroying cities and populated areas with civilians without military purpose. Truman could have agreed to the surrender conditions of the Japanese, but chose not to. Thank you for listening.
Question 3. Did Truman have the intent to kill? Yes, he did. Harry Truman did have the intent to kill. While the first attack was planned to destroy Japan's military base in Hiroshima, Truman was well aware that there were civilians at his next target location. The preliminary testing of Little Boy just showed how devastating the effects could be, thus proving that he did definitely have the intent to kill. The following is an excerpt from a public statement made by President Truman on the 6th of August, 1945. The Japanese began the war from the air at Pearl Harbor. They have been repaid manyfold. If they do not now accept our terms, they may expect a rain of ruin from the air, the like of which has never been seen on this earth. The following is an excerpt from a public statement made by President Truman just 3 days later. The world will note that the first atomic bomb was dropped on Hiroshima military base. That was because we wished in this first attack to avoid, insofar, the killing of civilians. But that attack is not only a warning of things to come. If Japan does not surrender, bombs will have to be dropped on her war industries, and unfortunately, thousands of civilian lives will be lost. In one instance, he claimed that he didn't want to kill civilians, and then in the next sentence, he says, if they don't surrender, thousands of civilian lives will be lost. He then goes on to say, having found the bomb, we have used it. We have used it against those who attack us without warning at Pearl Harbor, against those who have starved and beaten and executed American prisoners of war, against those who have abandoned all pretense of obeying international laws of warfare. We have used it in order to shorten the agony of war, in order to save the lives of thousands and thousands of young Americans. Truman claimed that he had no warning about the bombing of Pearl Harbor, and then went around to do the exact same thing in Japan. Is an eye for an eye really the answer? So while he executed the Manhattan Project in order to save thousands of American lives, he had no issue in playing a part in the execution of thousands of Japanese civilians, thus seeing that American lives are of far greater value than Japanese lives. Although we realized that Japan was not completely innocent in this situation, it was Truman that had the power to stop the war by accepting the conditions of the Japanese emperor, which would have ended the war and saved many innocent Japanese lives. Question 4. Was Truman fully knowledgeable of the situation as it developed? Truman wasn't fully aware of the Manhattan Project as it progressed. He was only notified of its existence weeks after he was appointed president in 1945, following Roosevelt's death. The following is an excerpt from Truman's diary on the 17th of June, 1945. I've yet to decide the Japanese strategy. Shall we invade Japan proper, or shall we bomb and blockade? That is my hardest decision to date, but I'll make it when I have all the facts. It is clear that he didn't have all the facts and still went on with the bombing without knowing all of the intricate details. Ignorance is not an excuse for mass murder. The following is an excerpt from Truman's diary from the 25th of July, 1945. Simpson and I are in accord. The target will be a purely military one, and we will issue a warning statement, asking the Japs to surrender and save lives. I'm sure they will not do that, but we will give them the chance. It is certainly a good thing for the world that Hitler's crowd, or Stalin's, did not discover the atomic bomb. It seems to be the most terrible thing ever discovered, but it can be the most useful. Despite this agreement, the bombs were still used on civilian cities. Truman himself said that the discovery of the atomic bomb is the most terrible thing to ever be discovered, and that in the wrong hands, it can cause more destruction than our world can handle, especially in the wrong hands. But did he stop for a second to look at his own 2 hands, which would be forever covered in the blood of those innocent Japanese civilians? Thank you.
That's our case, Mike.
Thank you so much. Did y'all have any questions for us?
About the case or in general?
Either one.
Let's put it this way. What did you guys learn by looking through something like this 70 years later?
That we need to talk a little more. Oh, okay. My question is.
Sorry, she said she learned that they need to talk a little more instead of causing violence. Anyway, never.
Yeah.
Yeah, we heard.
Are American schools like what they are in the movies?
No, not at all.
Yeah, they're probably
Really?
worse.
They're not worse. They're not in the movies. In the movies, it's way different. Sometimes I wish school was like the movies. It's definitely more boring.
Schools can be rather interesting. Like I said, we have about 3,200 people. By the time our freshmen graduate, 9th grade graduate, will be right around 4,500. So we are growing rapidly fast with a tremendous amount of congestion in hallways and classrooms. We have some classrooms that are probably pushing 40 to 50 kids in the classes. So it's a lot different. Probably some of the students don't take it as seriously as they do in other countries, which is a lament.
Tell them how many we have in average in our class.
About 10.
In this
10,
class,
15.
In this
like our
school.
legal studies class, we have about 6 people.
8.
Eight people
Wow.
in our class.
Usually at other schools, it's around like 20 to 30, but because our school is so small, we
About
have,
15.
yeah.
Yeah, a standard class size say at a Catholic school would be about 25 to 30. On average, our class sizes in the junior school, so years 8 to 10, are around 22. And then in the senior years, because there's more options, there's obviously less kids in the classes as they choose like elective subjects like legal studies or chemistry or physics or subjects or home ec, etc.
That is crazy. Now, does Australia have cram schools like Taiwan and Korea and stuff too, or do they not?
No.
A big school to us is like
1,000.
No, 2,000. There are some
2,000 is like the biggest school that we have in South Australia.
Wow. And how far away are you from Adelaide?
About 10 minutes.
Yeah.
Yeah,
from
10 minutes, or basically from the airport, maybe 15, 20 minutes from the CBD.
See, we're located about 3 miles from our airport in Austin, and our school is growing real fast because of the airport. And other areas, they put in the road race. We have our Formula One racetrack out here too, and they're also putting in one of the world's largest water parks down the road. It's put in by the people that own Coors Beer Company, and they're putting in a large water park. It's going to be like a surfing indoor, not indoor, but a tidal wave pool is what I'm trying to say. It's supposed to be really, really nice. So there's a lot of growth in our area, but it's rapidly changing because when I first got here, we had about 1,200 students. So we're almost going to triple in size next year than what it was when I first got here.
They're like
Wow.
size of what we are.
Oh my God.
That's too many.
That is huge.
Yeah, and we have all the problems of a growing school. So that's, and then we have another problem with language. We have a lot of our students are not native English speakers. So we have that. How many different languages are spoken at your school?
72.
I think there's 72 different languages.
Wow.
And I would over maybe 45 to 50% of our students are English as a second language.
Wow. Okay, now what we're trying to do, I was going to tell you, it's kind of neat. We are starting to offer moot courts in all kinds of different languages, from Farsi, Hindi, Chinese, Korean, and that. So if you guys have people that can speak those different languages, I have the cases and stuff. I'll email you the links. And we would like to set up some with native speakers. So they could actually speak. Let's say if you had some students who could speak Korean, we have schools in Korea that they would go against in Korean. So you would teach them in English, but they could argue in their native language with another school in that native language. I think it's kind of nice.
Yeah. I don't think we have any Korean. Most of ours would probably be more Italian, Greek, Arabic.
Oh yeah.
Arabic would be
we have Arabic, and you could actually argue with all kinds of schools in Arabic.
okay.
But we have Italian as well, French, Spanish, Ukrainian, Bosnian.
Do you have Greek?
Yeah.
Do you have? Because I think next year our school is actually starting Greek up as a language.
Oh wow.
So that could link in.
Yeah, we would love to do Greek. In fact, I have about 3 or 4 schools in Greece that would love to be able to do a project. And what we would do is we eventually would like to try to do like one of those Peter Peddlers or something like that in Greek as well. So it'd be kind of neat. We could do Australian case. We could do one of these other cases. And this one today that you're about to, I'm going to send you is a religious faith healing case with some search warrant issues.
Okay. All right. Well, we're definitely at least a year away for the Greek because the kids, like as I said, it won't be introduced till next year, and then it depends how confident the students are in talking in that language.
Do they wear uniforms?
Well, you might think our
No, they
English
don't.
is foreign, so, you know.
Do you wear school uniform or do you just wear whatever you
Like,
want?
is that a uniform?
You have to wear blue.
No, we wear whatever we want. Me and my partner just unexpectedly matched today.
No, it's blue and white. You have to wear it.
No, it's not. It's not.
We don't have a uniform.
We have like so like we can't wear like anything like too short or too revealing, like things like that. But I mean, we can pretty much wear whatever we want.
We unexpectedly all matched as well.
Every day.
Now, you have a dress code, though. I know that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You have a uniform, don't you?
White
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we have Lisa's got our winter uniform on.
Oh,
Although
good.
her skirt's probably slightly short.
Everyone's skirt is,
Yeah.
everyone's skirt is slightly short.
Phoebe's got, hang on, our summer dress on, but she's still quite cold this morning. So
Stockings.
she's got stockings on underneath, and she's also obviously got the school jumper on. And then Jack's got the school shorts on. So basically, it's grey pants or shorts. And the girls can wear shorts or pants as well.
And you can wear shorts all
But
year
generally, the girls
I do because I don't like the pants.
See,
But yeah, they can.
in our
Yeah,
climate, we can wear shorts all year round here almost. Because we're still around 90 degrees, which is what 30, 32 Fahrenheit, centigrade.
90 degrees.
So we're still
Wow.
be there.
and we could
Yeah,
put
no.
the temperature in the middle of our winter.
Yeah, no, for our winter this year, some mornings it got down to 3 degrees, and by 9 o'clock, it was about 7 degrees. So we have had some quite cold days, not as rainy as what we've had in the past. But I think we're also set for a hot summer. Last summer we had temperatures of 45 degrees, which was almost unbearable for us. So there was lots of people at the beach and the water, swimming pools,
And didn't you have a lot of
etc.
fire?
But I've got no. Yeah, we did have quite a few bushfires.
Yeah, big one.
There was a big one at Sampson Flat in the hills, obviously with all the, the shrubs and the forestry and the trees, that took on quite a massive flare. And then there was, of course, massive winds at the time, so that only exacerbated all the effects.
45 degrees is like 113 Fahrenheit.
Yeah, that's what I thought. I told him 110, so I was just a little off, but I kind of knew it was hot.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, it's very hot.
Very hot for us.
We seldom get to that around here, but sometimes we can in August. But we've had, like in years past, we've had like 80 or 90 days in a row of over 100 and something degrees. So it can get pretty brutally hot. We just hadn't had rain in a long time, and we got like, it's raining a little bit today, but it hadn't had a lot of rain. Well, I know your school. When does your school get out now for this term?
Next week. Yeah, so they've got 1 week left, and then they've got 2 weeks holidays, and then the year 11s have a maximum of, I think, 6 weeks, but they do have exams. So I don't know if they've got 5 weeks and then exams, or 6 weeks and then exams. The calendar hasn't been released yet for next term.
And then
So
they
we
will
get 3
you'll be
sets.
done then, correct? You're done for the school year in after that 6 week.
Yeah, the year 11s will probably, the year 12s will finish in about 4 weeks. So that's including the school holidays. They have about 1 week when they come back, or 2 weeks. And then year 11s will finish about first week or second week of December and not come back until about the 28th of January. So they'll get a good 6, 7 weeks off, 8 weeks maybe, and then the year 10s will get 1 less week, and then the year 8s and 9s will get about 6 weeks holidays from Christmas till January.
Okay, just thinking ahead, when would be a good time to try to do our next case deal?
It would have to be February, and at the moment, my legal studies class for the first semester, I have 28 students, and for the second semester, I have 16. So I can definitely do at least perhaps 2 in the first semester, and definitely at least 1 in the second semester.
Okay. Yeah, we could try to even do one, you know, like in the latter part of our school year, which would be whenever in your term. But we would love to try to do 2. I'll email you those other ones so you can kind of see.
Yeah.
And then we'll try to do something from Peter's group so we can get him involved as well. But I thought the connection day was really good.
Yeah, it was a lot better. We've actually had the last two weeks a Wi-Fi upgrade, and that's on the curriculum network. So where all the students are working, the Wi-Fi upgrade is on that. So that now means that the DISC network, that the admin network for the teachers, is now a lot less busy, which means the connection was a lot better.
Oh, good, because it was almost instantaneous. There was no delay on our end for sure.
Yeah, it was much, much better than last time. Yeah.
So we'll look forward to doing it again, and I'll email you in the morning, I think, or okay?
Yeah.
Thank you so much, and have a great day today. Bye from...
okay, thanks, Mom.
Bye.
Bye.
By the way, can I ask you a quick question?